Hello, everybody. I am thrilled to introduce to you Ms. Lauren Connolly. She is an expert exercise physiologist who currently leads the Cardiac Rehabilitation program at Adventist Healthcare White Oak Medical Center. Lauren has been an athlete and very active her whole life. She was a star lacrosse player at St. Francis University, where she got her bachelor's in exercise physiology. Then she went on to further her education with a master's in exercise physiology with a specialization in cardiac rehab at East Stroudsburg University. So she's been an integral part of the cardiac rehab team at Adventist Healthcare for about 5 years, with her assuming the leadership role a year ago. So I would like to introduce you to Lauren Connolly. There were questions asked already in the presentation, and those will be read at the end of her presentation.
Thank you very much, Amy, for that awesome introduction. Let me go ahead and share my screen with everyone, and we'll go ahead and get started. So I'm going to talk today about the topic of managing and recovering from heart disease. We're going to review the basic points regarding overall recovery and the role exercise and nutrition can play in that process. And then we're going to touch on the benefits that cardiac rehab can provide as well. The first thing I want to say is that we want to remember our body, specifically our cardiovascular system, has been through some level of trauma, whether we are medically managing our condition or we're recuperating from open heart surgery. We always want to allow for appropriate recovery time. And in this time, this is when we have regular follow-up with our physicians. We have our medications adjusted, and our treatment plan for our steps back to better health is really put into place with our doctors. So a lot of the big measures of improved cardiac health that we're focusing on this time, our doctors are looking at our blood pressure numbers. They're looking at our heart rate. You may have a stress test at some point, and then they're also looking at your heart rhythm, your ECG or your EKG. So at this point, these are sort of those measures of improved cardiac health that we're focusing on. So we're beginning the transitioning back to normal life after being diagnosed with heart disease or having an intervention of some sorts. And it takes time and patience and care to get back to where we most likely really want to be before the event or the hospitalization occurred. So at this point, this is when resuming and initiating exercise after hospital discharge or a lapse in an exercise routine is really important. So again, whether we just had some sort of intervention or hospitalization for our condition, or this happened a couple years ago and we just haven't gotten back onto the bandwagon of managing our condition yet, that's what I'm referring to as a lapse, deconditioning can begin pretty quickly once we've suffered a cardiac event or been in the hospital or just haven't done it for a prolonged period of time. So at some point, we got to start resuming low level of activity. And the first step is to really just pay attention to how you feel. A lot of times when we get individuals calling into cardiac rehab and due to precautions, they can't start for a couple weeks, that's always the first recommendation. Get up, get moving, low levels, and pay attention to how you feel. At this point, you're really the person who knows yourself the best in terms of signs and symptoms. So just taking it easy at first and following any precautions that were spelled out to you. So a lot of the precautions really will surround people who have had open heart surgery, especially sternal precautions for about 6 weeks. And that's things like, waiting to pick up the grandbabies for about 6 weeks, not carrying heavy groceries and not reaching overhead too much. So once we've sort of started the process of getting back into activity and attempting to get back to our normal routine, normal life, this is when it is the perfect time to discuss cardiac rehab with your doctor. Again, whether if it's an event that's recent or in the history a couple years ago, a couple of months ago, it's always appropriate. So this is where I briefly want to touch on cardiac rehab. So who's appropriate for cardiac rehab? Really anyone diagnosed with a form of heart disease. You want to get back to your normal activities of daily living. You want to be able to take out the trash without shortness of breath. You want to be able to take your laundry up and down the stairs without shortness of breath or chest pain at all. So individuals with any of these following diagnoses are very much applicable for cardiac rehab. So we have anyone who's had any form of a heart attack recently, angina, often interchanged with the term chest pain, any type of valve replacement, repair, surgery, anyone diagnosed with heart failure, anyone who's had a bypass procedure, had the diagnosis of a cardiomyopathy, atrial fibrillation, if you've had a stent, or if you just have coronary artery disease. And I put that on there because some people who do come to cardiac rehab programs, they do indeed just have coronary artery disease. They didn't have any intervention of any kind, and they're just medically managing their condition. So even if you haven't had to have some sort of surgery, some sort of intervention to where you had to recoup from it, you can still take advantage of this type of rehab program. So why should people consider cardiac rehab in their recovery process over just going back to their local gym? So the big thing is that cardiac rehab should be viewed as your stepping stone to assist you back in your journey of getting back to normal life after your diagnosis or intervention. Our goal in this type of program, wherever you would go for cardiac rehab, is to get you back to the activities you liked to do, back to the gym or engaging in your choice of physical activity or exercise. So at its core, cardiac rehab is a monitored exercise program. We do strength training and we do a lot of cardiovascular exercise. And for those of you who may have already gone through it, you probably remember vividly everything that you went through. And at the core, it's truly exercise. But if you guys also remember, it's so much more than that. Whenever people come into a cardiac rehab program, they're going to learn their physical limitations, and they're exercising in a monitored, safe setting run by healthcare professionals. So the healthcare professionals in this field include a medical director who's always a cardiologist. There's always exercise physiologists. There's always registered nurses. And then sometimes you can even get other type of staff like rehab aides, physical therapists who are all working in this cohesive environment and resources to these patients together. So you do get personal exercise prescriptions tailored to your abilities, your goals that you want to achieve, and your fitness level. You'll also receive regular behavioral counseling with exercise physiologists and RNs to discuss specific things pertinent to your health and things that you want to achieve or try and change. You'll receive ongoing education over the course of your program, and every single cardiac rehab program will have all of these components, whether it's here in the state of Maryland or elsewhere. So this education is going to talk about your conditions. It's going to talk about all the risk factors, goals, and learning needs that all the clients in cardiac rehab will fall into. And then you always want to remember, you're going to have these staff members in cardiac rehab as people you can utilize to ask questions and receive advice regarding your heart disease management. So I want to use this to turn in our discussion to nutrition and exercise and why they are key factors in our recovery and our health. So we've all heard probably dozens and dozens and dozens of times that we should eat right, and we should exercise, you'll feel better, it's healthy for you. It'll help your heart disease. It'll prevent illness and disease. It also helps with recovery from an event or procedure. But why? Oftentimes, and I've even had this happen, you go into the doctor's office and they're like, oh, you should do this, you should do that. But then the recommendations sometimes stop there. They don't really explain why. And oftentimes what I've learned is if people know why something is so important, they're more likely to stick to it. It's very similar to like when we take our medications. If we understand why they're so important, people are much more likely to be extremely compliant. So the same thing falls into place for trying to stick to an exercise routine, trying to stick to eating healthy. If all of this is better for us, then and if we understand why, we're much more likely to commit to it and make it a lifestyle rather than just sort of a crash course to try and get through it. So first, I want to talk about exercise. So Exercise is a huge part of recovery for in the process of heart disease. Of course, cardiac rehab is sort of like the cornerstone of this for individuals with heart disease. And a lot of times we say, well, if you can't, fall in line with any of these and you're still not convinced, insurance will pay for cardiac rehab. So that's a really good thing to remember too. So physical benefits, what we can see when we're exercising, the benefits that we can physically see. Number one, we get improved muscular strength. Our legs, when we, go up the stairs or stand up out of the couch, they'll feel stronger. They're not going to feel as sore. We'll have improved muscular endurance. So your stamina on your walks outside, your legs will hang in there a little bit more with you. Your arms may be able to do a lot more work in the kitchen or around the house or in the yard. We can get weight loss. We can have improved muscle tone, muscle size or muscle growth. We can also have decreased shortness of breath. It's important to remember that our cardiovascular system also includes our lungs. So when we're undergoing cardiovascular conditioning or cardio, we're also improving the efficiency of our lungs. So our breathing can become drastically improved with regular effort. And then we can also get improved structure and function of our joints. So people can have a lot less arthritic pain and discomfort. They can have greater range of motion in those joints, and they can have greater flexibility. Even with diagnosed arthritis, these benefits can be seen. So then there's the clinical benefits of exercise, the things we can't really see. So we can get an improved blood pressure and heart rate from regular cardiovascular training. So when we exercise regularly, our whole circulatory system, our arteries and our veins will begin to relax and dilate. So when they relax, the force against those arteries is decreased, and that is directly tied to having a lower blood pressure. And again, when we do regular cardiovascular training over time, our heart and our pumping capacity of our heart will become more efficient, and that directly ties into having a lower heart rate, which means your heart can do the same amount of work at a lower rate, meaning greater efficiency. We can also have improved cholesterol or lipid profile. So specifically our HDL, our good cholesterol, the stuff that we want really high, we can actually see a little bit of an increase in this with regular exercise. And triglycerides, we can see a decrease in triglycerides, which is another one of those components of our lipid profile. We can actually see a drastic benefit from that as well. Individuals who may be pre-diabetic or diabetic, we can have improved blood sugar control. So when we exercise, the glucose that's kind of zooming around in our bloodstream will actually get taken up and used as energy. So exercise actively works to get rid of excess glucose from our bloodstream, exactly like our diabetic medications are doing. We can also get, like I mentioned, an improved pumping capacity of our heart, again, which means greater efficiency of our heart muscle. We can get improved circulation, and we can also get improvements in our mood, stress, depression, anxiety, even anger. Things like that can improve drastically with regular cardiovascular exercise. So at the end of the day, we really want you to think of exercise as medicine. So if there's one, magic pill that you could take that could help your blood pressure, your cholesterol, your glucose, your mood, your body composition, wouldn't we all take it? And that's something that exercise does. So if we can get our regular doses of exercise, we can help our health drastically. So, okay, we have bought into the importance of exercise. So how much exercise do I actually need to do to get these benefits? What do I need? The bare minimum, here you go, 3 days a week, absolute minimum you want to do for true cardiovascular exercise. We want to remain physically active. We want to continue, walking a little bit farther from the grocery store to our parking lot. We want to continue to kind of get up regularly throughout our house, do some yard work, do cleaning. But when it comes to true cardiovascular exercise, that's where we're going to get all of these clinical benefits. And we want to do that at least 3 days a week. 30 to 60 minutes per session is the ideal range for cardiovascular exercise. And as a general rule, we want to try and achieve roughly about 150 minutes of exercise a week. You can break that up into, 5 or 6 days a week, or you can do 3 days a week and break that up in between those 3 sessions. If you're someone who is, been through the process of getting back into regular exercise and you've worked your way up through a cardiac rehab program, now you're in the maintenance phase and you're doing a really good job, still make sure you give yourself at least 1 day of rest for your muscles, for your cardiovascular system. This will really help prevent soreness and overuse injuries and things like that. And remember, if we're only doing 1 to 2, maybe 3 days a week, and we're not seeing, the weight loss that we want or the clinical responses that we want, greater frequency can provide greater benefits. So trying to get to like 4 or 5 days a week is always a very reasonable thing to do. But this is the outline of the minimum that we need to do to be considered a regular exerciser and to get all these benefits that we just talked about in the previous slide. So I want to touch on the basics of food and nutrition. So we all love food. This can be a really touchy topic in cardiac rehab with some of our patients. Oftentimes we get, eye rolls because this is a complex topic. Nutrition is complex. And note I didn't say diet, because diet implies a temporary fix, a crash course in changing your habits, but you're going to go back to it once you reach the numbers that you want, once you reach the weight that you want. But we're going to talk about nutrition, because I want you guys to think about your food as your fuel and as your lifestyle habits. So when you go to make changes to the food that you put into your body, it should be things that you're comfortable maintaining for the rest of your life. Choices that you aren't feeling deprived or completely cut away from. So nutrition is very complex, just like exercise is pretty complex. So we're just going to touch on the basics. And like Amy said at the beginning, please, I know a lot with exercise and nutrition can be very individualized. There's a lot of exceptions that people have that kind of fall within, a different parameter. So if you do have any specific questions, please feel free, don't forget to ask, and we'll address them at the end. But I want to get into the basic nutrition principles that everyone should follow. So if you feel like you've kind of, especially in quarantine, followed off the rails with your overall nutrition and your eating patterns, the first 2 things you should always do is try and have everything in moderation and have appropriate portion sizes. We can get in, you can dive deep into the details of, bad fats versus good fats, different types of protein, sodium restrictions, and all of that. But if you got to start someplace, this is where it should be. Everything in moderation entails that you're not having bad choices every day of the week. You allow yourself to indulge every once in a while, but you're not going to be consuming anything in excess or one specific type of food in excess. You may have fast food once every 2 weeks. You may have some ice cream once every now and then, and that's okay if we have it in moderation. And appropriate portion sizes is huge, because we have this, actually in cardiac rehab, this diagram that shows one of the healthiest meals you could possibly put on a plate. But if you start expanding those portion sizes bigger and bigger, you're just getting an excessive amount of calories. And what you don't burn off with what you put in your body is going to store it. So this will directly lead to increases in our waistline and our overall body composition changes. So having everything in moderation and appropriate portion sizes are the first 2 steps we should take. And then the other thing I put in there is focus on consuming whole natural foods. So over the past few years, all of the latest research and everything that we've talked about with dietitians and cardiac rehab have all been towards, first and foremost, try and eat your foods in the form that they're meant to be in. Make sure we're not altering them too much. If you have your chicken or fish, just go ahead and bake it or grill it and use very simple toppings and seasonings. Have, whole avocados, have whole nuts, go for whole fruits and whole vegetables, things like that. Try and eat them in the natural form. That's how our body is meant to eat them. And that's been where those newer dietary recommendations have gone, to whole natural foods. And I put consult a dietitian on there because it's a really amazing tool to use. So one thing a lot of people don't realize is most health insurance policies will provide a consultation with a dietitian free of charge, which is absolutely amazing. Just like they'll cover our annual physical, they'll cover a consultation with a dietitian. So this is a really important resource to take advantage of and investigate to see if this is indeed something you have at your disposal. So a lot of people will say, oh, well, I know what I need to do. I just got to do it. And it's, of course, much easier said than done. So consulting a dietitian can really help you talk about areas where you feel you might be falling short. And just remembering they are the experts in this field, just like we have a primary care physician for our basic health needs, and we have a cardiologist for our heart disease. We may have an endocrinologist for any diabetic or hormonal concerns that we have. There's specifics and there's specialists for all areas. And that's what a dietitian is. They are the specialist in the field of nutrition. And they're going to be staying on top of all of the latest recommendations. So even if you think you eat, the most perfect eating plan ever, going to a dietitian is still beneficial, because the worst they can say is you are doing a great job, keep it up. And to have everything you're doing be confirmed by the professional, by the expert, is really priceless. So definitely consider that and keep that in the back of your mind as we think about nutrition and our health. So this right here is how I want to approach talking about a little bit more specifics in terms of diet. So I'm not sure how many of you guys are familiar with ChooseMyPlate.gov. So this is the USDA, the United States Department of Agriculture's website for overall heart healthy or general dietary guidelines. So every 5 years, the USDA goes through all the latest dietary research, and they compile the latest set of recommendations for dietary patterns. So these are the people who, years and years ago said eggs are bad, stay away. And then, 5-10 years later, they're like, eggs are fine, it's okay. And now, it's kind of come around and come to fruition, new guidelines and new recommendations, because there's always new research being done. So this is an example of what's called a MyPlate Plan. So these are really cool. A lot of people are like, okay, I know I need to get, 2 servings of this, 2 servings of that, but what is a serving and what exactly does that look like for me? So if you go on to ChooseMyPlate.gov, this is an amazing place to get really good educational resources. So there's a tab in there that says My Plate Plan. And this is an example of like a healthy eating style for an individual on a 2,000 calorie a day diet. So this really represents sort of the average American in my mind, and what their diet should include to be having a very, very well-rounded, healthy diet that directly falls in line with heart healthy eating guidelines that places like the American Heart Association would recommend. They fall exactly in line with this MyPlate Plan from the USDA. So you can see really all the main food groups are broken down. And again, there's options under MyPlate Plan for even individuals who would be consuming about 1,200 calories a day, all the way up to about 2,000 calories a day. And there's MyPlate plans that surpass that calorie goal as well. Because again, with diet and with exercise, everyone is different. Everyone has different needs. And what works for one person is most likely not going to work for another. So looking at it individually is really important. So taking this general plan of 2,000 calories a day, you can see it's broken out into fruits, vegetables, grains, protein, dairy, and then there's a section at the bottom where it says limit. So you can see fruits is 2 cups of a serving, so 2 servings, 2 cups a day, where you want to focus on whole fruits. And within that, you can have fruits that are fresh, frozen, canned, or dried, and those will all kind of fall in line with servings of fruit. And then same with vegetables, 2.5 cups a day is an ideal recommendation. And that's probably the minimum you'll see as a recommendation for veggies. And when it comes to vegetables, just like fruits, we want to eat many different colors. They all provide all sorts of vitamins and minerals and things that we could be lacking in our diet if we're not eating enough fruits and vegetables. So we want to make sure we get, the dark leafy green vegetables, red, orange, and all different colors to really make sure we're getting well-rounded dietary needs met. And then grains. About 6 ounces is a good serving size per day. We want to make at least half of our grains whole grains. So that means maybe swapping out your bread or your English muffins or your rice, your pasta, things like that, even like your oats and your oatmeal in the morning. All of those have true whole grain options available. So whole grains are great because they can really help us increase our fiber intake, and fiber has been shown to really help our digestive system, our metabolism, and even impacts our cholesterol levels. So we really want to try and look at our food, look at the nutrition facts, and find things with whole grain in them. And then when it comes to protein, a lot of times this might be the easiest one to think about in terms of diet. At a 2,000 calorie a day diet, about 5.5 ounces of protein is recommended per day. A lot of times some of us even get a little bit more, which is okay. But the first thing we want to remember is to mix up our protein foods. Of course, everyone probably knows, all right, I should be, having my lean choices like lean poultry, chicken, and things like fish and seafood are excellent. Trying to incorporate seafood at least once a week is pretty standard recommendation. And then don't forget about including things like beans and peas and unsalted nuts and seeds, soy products and eggs. They all have an excellent amount of protein, and protein keeps us full. It keeps us satisfied longer, and it is essential when you are exercising and you are being active to get a really good dietary source of protein. This is what's going to help rebuild our muscles, our cardiac muscles, and our everything from our quads to our biceps. All of that is going to be extremely benefited by protein. So one thing you can also think about too is Greek yogurt. That's an excellent source of protein as well, and that can segue us into dairy. So 3 cups a day of dairy. Some people, if you've gone off of the dairy train and you've chosen to go to like nut milks or oat milks or things like that, that is perfectly fine. If you do drink regular dairy, trying to move to low fat or fat free for your milks and your yogurts is usually the best option. Soy beverages most of the time have been shown to be chemically extremely similar to regular milk because they fortify it with all of those really good things like extra protein, like vitamin D and things like that. So we really want to go towards the lower fat options because dairy does have solid fat in there. So this will help us cut back on our saturated fat intake. So you can see at the bottom, it says limit. Drink and eat less of these 3 things. So these are probably the 3 things that we hear a lot about from our doctors and other healthcare professionals when it comes to trying to limit things in our diet. So sodium, saturated fat, and added sugars. Those are pretty standard things we want to try and limit. So these are some specific recommendations that we want to try and limit it to. So we know sodium, when consumed in excess, can make us retain fluid. It can be very, very bad for people with heart failure to have excessive amounts of sodium. It can be very dangerous. And also just for normal, healthy individuals, having a sodium intake that's high can really impact your blood pressure and make you predisposed to having higher blood pressure and other issues in the future. So really everyone should be watching their sodium intake, and a good recommendation is 2,300 milligrams or less per day. So sodium can be very individualized. I do know some people who are very restricted to sodium intake of no more than 1,500 milligrams a day. And that's something you really, really want to try and stick to. And one way you can do that is focusing on eating whole natural foods because they're not going to have excessive amounts of sodium. Where we get the excessive amount of sodium in our diet is from pre-processed foods. So anything that's already made for us at a fast food restaurant or just a restaurant in general, anything that's pre-packaged or bagged or canned, you can pretty much guarantee it's going to have sodium in it. So looking at those labels is really important. Or saturated fat. So for a while, everyone knows, saturated fat and trans fat, those are the bad fats. We want to avoid them and have as little amount of it as possible. So trans fats should be on their way out. There was a lot of changes a while ago that really said by 2020, trans fats should be completely gone. And then when the administration changed, some things did get pushed back. So it looks like we could be seeing some trans fats into 2021. And that's something to just keep a lookout for because trans fats are are kind of the man-made fats. Partially hydrogenated oils is what you'll see on labels. So really trying to stay away from the trans fats as much as possible. Saturated fats is what you're going to see most. And those are the solid fats that you'll see, like butter, really fatty cuts of red meat and things like that are going to have a lot of saturated fat. So cutting those down, because that has been shown to directly impact our bad cholesterol levels. And also added sugars. Added sugars, you know, we think sugars, we may think our blood glucose, and a lot of diabetics may be focusing on the sugars as well. However, added sugars have also in recent research been shown to affect our cholesterol and our lipid profile as well. So there's another reason why other people should watch their added sugars too. And a good way to do that is just to make sure we're not having too many sugary beverages. That's going to be a big portion of where we get that. And then sweets and desserts and things like that is where we're going to get added sugars. So overall, this is a good general overview of, you know, the specifics, at least at, you know, the tip of the iceberg of what we should be getting in terms of nutrition for heart healthy eating. And then you can see at the bottom, it says be active too. So they haven't forgot about that portion. They stuck that in there as well. So this is sort of the overall recommendation. And I can always pass along a link to this presentation so people can see this later and reference it if they do like. But remember, it's at choosemyplate.gov, and you can go under MyPlate Plan. And this is an excellent place to go for educational resources, especially about nutrition. So there are a lot of clinical benefits, and we touched on some of them that we can get related to our cardiac health. And we already said, you know, we can get better blood pressure. We can have lower cholesterol, specifically our LDL and our triglycerides can be impacted by really good nutrition. We can achieve a healthier body composition. It can help us lose weight, and it can also help us manage our glucose levels. In addition, we can have other nutritional benefits. We can have decreased levels of inflammation in our body. We can have better gut health, which can lead to a better metabolism, which can allow us to absorb our food much better. It can help fight against disease and illness. And then it can also assist us in maintaining a very healthy immune system if we eat well. So these are, especially this last one, trying to have a good immune system nowadays is really important. So really good nutrition can provide us with that. So this is my last slide, and this is something that I wanted to just show everyone because these are excellent resources. Nowadays, especially when we're still kind of sort of cooped up at home, we need to be able to have some information. And with everything kind of very electronic, we have a lot of access to really good resources. So to avoid you guys from going to Wikipedia or places like that, these are really good, educational, reliable, accurate resources. So the first one that we just talked about when we were talking about nutrition, choosemyplate.gov. Again, this is the USDA dietary guidelines and educational resources. So I do want to note that it's 2020 and this is the 5-year mark of the latest dietary guidelines. There are current meetings going on as we speak, and the dietary guidelines, the most updated versions will be published this year at some point. So there could always be some slight change in recommendations that we see. So this would be a good place to look and find later in the year where there may be some updates posted. So of course, the American Heart Association is an excellent resource. They're at heart.org. And something that a lot of people don't know of is that the AHA, or American Heart Association, also has a YouTube channel. So if you aren't someone who wants to read through literature and research and things like that, they have educational videos on everything from what is a stent, what is the basics of heart failure, to how do I manage this risk factor and things like that, very much all pertaining to heart disease. So that's an excellent resource to look at. For someone who might want a little bit more literature based, we have ACSM, the American College of Sports Medicine. They have a lot of really good articles about exercise and recovery. The Mayo Clinic, the Cleveland Clinic, and the American College of Cardiology are also very good resources for more true literature if people want to read through that. And then PCNA, the Preventive Cardiovascular Nurses Association, they have really, really good educational resources for all things related to heart disease and recovery and management. And then lastly, eatright.org is the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. They are very much tied to putting out and publicizing dietary guidelines as well. So they're a really good resource to have too. So that is really wrapping up everything I have to talk to you about today. We ran over a little bit from managing and recovering heart disease, the role cardiac rehab can play, and then the things we can do specifically related to exercise and nutrition. So on top of that, I just want to make a point to make sure you guys, even during this time, make sure you get regular appointments with your doctors, even if it's via Zoom, via Skype. Make sure you're asking questions and staying on top of your follow-up with them and taking our medications regularly. So I'll go ahead and pass it off and see if we have any questions at all about the presentation.
My name is Jeff Steinhorn. I've been your background host here today. I'd like to remind you that you can use your chat mechanism to submit questions that we'll ask Lauren. Thank you very much, by the way. It was very, very good.
Thank you.
This was recorded, and we will put it on our YouTube channel, educational series, at a future date. Can you comment about virtual cardiac rehab? Is there such a thing? And how do you manage the risks if you can't monitor blood pressure, heart rate, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, so virtual cardiac rehab, that was a big question back in March. We had to close down our cardiac rehab facility, I believe it was on March 16th. And we had a lot of discussions with other entities in the rehab field, like PT and OT, and they do have virtual platforms. However, cardiac rehab does not have a virtual platform yet. We have started, if you are a member of a cardiac rehab program, they have started to open up with very strict reopening guidelines and screening protocols. For example, at our cardiac rehab institution, we're only doing 3 patients at a time. Everyone is extremely spread out, and they have their own equipment, and they really don't touch much other than their exact pieces, and they wear masks and things like that. So when it comes to concerns and exercising at this time, yes, individuals with heart disease, especially with respiratory problems as well, like COPD and asthma, are at a much higher risk at this time to go back to a cardiac rehab facility, or even to go to the gym as things are starting to open up a little bit more. So it really depends on the institution you're going to go to and seeing what kind of guidelines they've put in place for your safety. And I think the biggest thing is just to make sure we're staying active regularly, even if that just means walking outside a couple times a day for 10 minutes at a time, and getting a feel for, what the progress of our whole opening up procedure. So it's really touch and go, and a lot of different places have a lot of different responses, and depends on the cases and the area. And a lot of different areas, are a little bit ahead or a little bit behind each other. So looking at the areas where you used to exercise or where you attended cardiac rehab and seeing what their sort of reopening procedure and protocol will be is really important. And if you don't feel comfortable yet, that's really smart too. So, and the last thing you should do is talk to your cardiologist or talk to your doctor and say, hey, I want to resume cardiac rehab, or hey, I want to go back to my gym. Do you think this is safe for me? Because we do have some individuals who their cardiologists were like, nope, I don't want this person coming back yet at this time. So having your doctor who knows your medical history or your condition extremely well, give you some specific recommendation on that is always really important. And then of course, even if they said, yeah, go for it, and you don't feel comfortable, continuing to do physical activity and exercise in your home is always appropriate. Just really making sure we're getting up and we're moving regularly is the key.
How has your workday changed as a result of social distancing? And more importantly, how can we as patients make life easier for dedicated people like yourself?
So I think the big thing is using these sort of electronic platforms that we have now as the first point of communication with your doctors. I know there are doctors' offices and rehab facilities like ours that are opening up, but if you just need regular standard follow-up, call, see if you can set up, just phone conversations or Zoom or Skype consultations with your physicians first. Until things, have completely resolved, trying to limit that type of exposure to areas to where other people who are coming in and may be sick might be is really good. So to make it easier on healthcare professionals, really try and utilize all of these sort of electronic and virtual platforms that they have is the easiest thing to do. Of course, there are times where we're going to have to go in person, and just make sure you're doing your part by wearing a mask, using hand sanitizer, try not to touch your face as much, and just trying to stay away from really large public gatherings and things like that, and keep yourself safe. If you know that you're at higher risk, you may be around someone who's at higher risk, or you may be needing to go back and forth from doctor's appointments and things like that. Just making the smart decision and just kind of taking a little bit at a time. I know everyone's opening up their circles just a little bit as things start to open up here and there. So really just being smart and utilizing these virtual platforms for basic follow-up is really important. A lot of hospitals and urgent cares and things like that would prefer you to kind of call your doctor first or call ahead to see if you need to go there, or a better avenue treatment would be more applicable for you. So really utilize your phone and your computer and laptop and things like that first before you kind of rush into a rehab center or rush into a doctor's appointment or hospital of any kind.
I have a question from Mark G, who says that he was going to the gym 5 times a week, but
that's great.
Now with the heart disease, his heart disease onset 7 years ago, he has been substituting a 1 mile walk every day instead of the gym because of COVID.
Yeah.
What could he add to the routine besides his brisk walk daily to make up for the loss of the gym?
So that's excellent. Yeah. And a lot of us don't have access to all the awesome equipment a gym provides us, especially if we are used to maybe challenging ourselves a little bit more on maybe a little bit harder pieces like a stair step or elliptical, recumbent bike or stationary bike, spin class, lifting class, whatever it may be. A lot of us, including myself, had to kind of take a step back, and you're making your choices on your own. But you're like, man, this feels like nothing compared to what I was doing at the gym. So just to remember that even if you don't feel like you are exercising at this vigorous capacity that you may be used to, the brisk walk that you're doing 5 times a week is benefiting you tremendously. You may feel like you have the capability to do more, but you are getting excellent benefits from it at the level and the routine that you are doing. So there's a lot of things you can do to change up your routine. Some people, if you can't, have the luxury of going out and just buying home exercise equipment or doing all these, subscription services, there are so many things on YouTube that are resistance videos that you can follow along on. You can find household items or just use your body weight for resistance exercises. And I think that's the biggest component a lot of people are missing out on, is some sort of strength or resistant training, because cardiovascular exercise is extremely important, but any well-rounded exercise routine should be challenging our muscles in the strength and resistance category as well. So try and explore exercise videos, YouTube for exercise classes that you can follow along on, and just start off by using your body weight. You can purchase very light dumbbells, pretty inexpensive nowadays. I've even seen them at CVS and Walmart, things like that. But also using household items like wine bottles, like cans of soup, water bottles, even jugs of water. I've even seen people use their children as resistance pieces to help them out for, squats and curls and things like that. So really, at this time, we all have to be really creative and be willing to just give something a try and see if it'll work for us in the meantime until we can get back to those resources that we're used to having.
Yeah, but in the midst of this record-breaking heat wave, it probably isn't safe, is it, to rehab in the middle of this heat wave? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah. So exercising in the heat and even like in the cold, it definitely comes with precaution. So the first thing we always tell people is try and time your outdoor walks, whether it's just walking with the dog, walking with your spouse or significant other or your children, or if you're going for a jog, whatever it may be when you're going outside, even like gardening and things like that, it can be pretty taxing. If you're out there for a while, try and just pay attention and time it a little bit. And this is where we may need to give ourselves a little bit of grace. So we might need to start a little bit earlier in the day or a little bit later in the evening. So exercising in the heat is safe if you are, doing things like staying hydrated is really, really important, and make sure you wear really appropriate breathable clothing. It will be a little bit uncomfortable because it will be a little bit sweaty, but there's absolutely nothing wrong with sweating unless we have some pretty significant clinical considerations that your physician may have given you. But if you are a regularly active individual, walking outside when it's a little bit warmer or humid can be safe. You just have to make sure that you're wearing appropriate clothing, and you're carrying your cell phone and things like that with you, and you're staying very hydrated. Those are the best things you can do if you still want to be able to go out and do that activity. And then timing it, going a little bit earlier in the day, avoiding that midday peak to where the sun is at its hottest and the humidity as highest, and then trying to go a little bit later in the evening as well.
Sam from Rockville wants to know, is it okay to skip meals? And if so, which one might be the best to skip or miss? That's why he asked the question.
Yeah, so skipping a meal is, it can be questionable sometimes, and that is very independent on every single individual. So some people have tried, and that kind of falls in line with this new trend of intermittent fasting that some people have done. So the first thing you want to do is really look at your condition. A lot of us are taking medications that should be taken with food. So that's the first thing you should do, is make sure that you are not going against any recommendations for your medication compliance, because that can affect some of the metabolism of the drugs that we're taking. So it would not be an option to try skipping meals or any type of intermittent fasting if that kind of falls in line with you. And it's really not recommended to not eat for a specific amount of time. So a lot of people who are trying to lose weight will, for example, skip breakfast because they're like, I'm not that hungry in the morning. I can last until noon. However, getting something in your system earlier in the day actually speeds up your metabolism, and it actually starts your body to burn extra calories earlier than it would. So there's a lot of things out there that'll say, well, it'll burn fat, it'll do this, it'll do that. But that really is only applicable for people who are already extremely fit and have a lot of body mass that is muscle. So a lot of these things that we see in the media and in the news, these trends are not applicable for a majority of the American population. So I would not recommend skipping meals. If you are someone who wants to try and cut down on calorie intake, something you can do is have some sort of fruit and green smoothie in the morning, and then some sort of very basic protein shake, and then start with solid food midday. But you have to make sure you're getting something in your system to keep your metabolism going. So I would not recommend ever skipping meals, especially if someone is a diabetic. That can really mess with our blood sugar levels and things like that. And if you're exercising regularly, your body needs fuel, just like your car needs gas and oil. Your body's fuel is the food that we put in it. So really just trying, I think the best thing to do is cut back on those in between meal snacks, or take our meals and make them a little bit smaller and have them about, every 4 hours or so. So those are some different approaches you can take, but overall the entire healthcare field would probably not recommend skipping meals. And if you did, that's something you'd really want to talk to a dietitian about, so they can help you plan and approach it in a very healthy, safe way.
Jay Roberts asked, Lauren, do you have any recommendations for heart rate monitors and other technology tools for independent cardio exercise?
Yeah, so there are so many models out there nowadays. I am a huge fan of the Apple Watch. I don't take mine off ever since I got it about 4 years ago. Some people that may be a little too, yeah, there you go. Let me tell you, they're addicting. They're addicting. My father will even send, oh, I got this many steps today, and I look and I'm like, oh crap, he's beating me. So then I get my butt up off the couch and I, go outside, walk my dog again or something like that. So they are awesome tools for motivation. And there are all different kinds. And it really just depends on what you want. So there are really basic pedometers that you can get off of Amazon, extremely inexpensive. You can just clip it to your waistband or your collar or something like that, and it just tracks your basic steps for the day. And what that will tell you is, in the grand scheme of things, how active you were. And in a perfect world, everyone would be getting about 8,000 to 10,000 steps a day. And that says you're being really active. Now, the average American does not get anywhere near that. So that's where these activity trackers and devices come into play, because they'll motivate us and they'll show us and give us a very accurate picture of, what we're actually doing to what we think we're doing on a daily basis. So you can get very basic pedometers. Then you can get anything from the brand Fitbit, Garmin, Apple. There's all sorts of other navigation ones, and you can get ones that are really expensive and will even monitor your EKG and your heart rate. It'll track your exercise on almost every single cardio device you can possibly think of, track the distance you've walked throughout the entire day. Or you can get something like a very basic Fitbit that can go around your wrist. And it's pretty simple technology wise, and it can give you your steps, the amount of time that you were active during the day. It can also remind you to get up every hour, which is really good. So there's so many options out there. Like I said, I'm a huge fan of the Apple Watch because I love that it can monitor my heart rate, and I basically just click start on my outdoor walk, and it'll track my distance and my calories and my time and my steps all at once. So looking at all the options out there, really any type of monitoring of your behavior is an excellent thing to do, because again, it motivates us and it shows us what we're capable of. And over time, you're like, okay, I did a mile yesterday. I think I can do a mile and a half. And it shows you kind of where you are compared to where we should. And then again, gives us that accurate picture of what we're actually doing versus, how much activity we may think we're doing. So I would really recommend anything in the Fitbit category. Has always had very, very good reviews, really good customer service, pretty good price point. They have very basic ones and very, very snazzy ones. Things like the Garmin and the Apple Watch do run a little bit more price-wise, but they will sync up to your phone. You can sync them up to any iPad or laptop and access, a whole history of database almost of all of your activity, which is pretty cool. So you just want to weigh what you want to get out of it. And if you want something that can just track basic steps, you can get very simple, very accurate and effective pedometers off of things like Amazon or eBay or things like that. So there's all sorts of resources out there, and any of those are really good. And the last thing I want to say is, if you do have like a smartphone of any kind, a lot of them do already track your steps. So I know it's in the Health app if you have an Apple device, but if you have a different device, I'm not sure, I can't speak to what setting it would be under, but a lot of these smartphones nowadays already track our steps. They probably track a lot of things that we do, but steps is one of them. That's a really good thing. So you can look into that. If you keep your phone on you all the time, and you keep it in your pocket on you all day, that could be something that you can already have at the tips of your fingers that you didn't know about. So that's another thing to look into as well.
Yes, the Apple Watch is an expensive solution, but then again, let me see now. I want to show you this. What else can take a single lead? Come on. A single lead ECG if you have the right watch.
Exactly.
If there's I know I don't see, but can you see this? If you watch, it'll actually start to form a graph.
Yes.
Say it. I don't know if can you see that?
But it's very small, but yeah, it gives a really good depiction of all the really cool
And
technological
I
advances.
can send that to my cardiologist.
Mm-hmm.
It'll alert me if my heart rate goes up too high, too low.
Exactly.
Tells me if I'm in an AFib condition. If
yeah.
it falls, it'll call an if I fall, to call an emergency. Enough of the commercial. So,
Apple should cut you a check.
my spouse keeps putting salt in my food. How can I get them to back off? I mean, are there resources to educate these caregivers?
Okay.
Well, touch on that.
Yeah. So here's the thing I want to clarify about salt. So the salt shaker on our table is not the actual huge culprit that a lot of us think it is. A majority of our sodium, let's say they made they made some sort of like Italian dish or something like that. And a majority of the sodium is going to come from all the sauce and the canned products and the meats and the cheese. The salt that you actually put on at the table, it seems kind of like a lot because you can actually visibly see it, but compared to the amount that's already in all of these prepackaged ingredients is night and day. So really, to reduce sodium, the first thing you should do is cut back on like all sorts of condiments, all sorts of toppings and like dressings, and finding lower sodium options there. Any type of sauce, even our crushed tomatoes that we get that seem really healthy, flip that nutrition label around. It's got a lot of sodium in there most part. Anything like, soy sauce, teriyaki sauce, things like that, a ton of sodium. All of our meats, especially deli meats, cured meats, sausages, even just like ground beefs and things like that, they have a good amount of sodium in there as well. And even like breads and cheeses, all of those types of things, that is where we're going to get most of our sodium from, and not from that salt shaker at the table. So what we always try and tell our patients is try and cook your meals with whole natural foods, use minimal, canned ingredients as possible. But nowadays you can find almost anything with reduced salt or no salt added. So I even bought just like crushed tomatoes yesterday at the store, found a no salt added option. And it was, even less expensive than some of the other versions. So really just trying to pay attention, look at what you kind of eat on a regular basis, and then look at the ingredients that you put in those meals and those average things that you'll normally eat for like breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and see what the sodium content is. You'll be really surprised. It's going to come from the food that kind of was already put together in the meal, and not the salt shaker. So now for spouses and things like that, that can often be a point of contention in the household, because they're like, well, I don't have a heart problem, so why should I cut back on this? I like this. I don't want to give it up. It doesn't taste good without salt, or this or that. So, trying to maybe make things kind of bare bones and then leave it to where everyone can kind of add the stuff on top to how they see fit. Or like I said before, try and see if your insurance carrier or your doctor can refer you to a dietitian, because oftentimes hearing it from the horse's mouth, hearing it from the expert is when it will kind of sink in for people when they know that they need to cut back on the sodium. Oftentimes when spouses or significant others hear it from the expert in person, it can really help strive for change in the home. The other options are just trying to, maybe try and help them cook a little bit differently and see how it goes over. But all of the nutrition resources like choosemyplate.gov, they have a lot of health tip sheets on sodium and sodium consumption and ways to cut back. So that's a good resource to go to as well, to reference anything dietary wise. But yeah, sodium is very tricky because a lot of people, it has a lot to do with habit, has a lot to do with taste buds, and just trying to cut back just a little bit at a time really makes a world of difference. So no one's saying you have to go out tomorrow and cut out every milligram of sodium that you consume, but doing it a little bit at a time will allow you to adjust to your taste buds to it, because they will adapt. Allow your partner or your significant other to adjust as well. And then over time, it can just become a habit, and things might not be as difficult and as strenuous. So trying to do it not as drastically too is a good thing.
Our chapter vice president, Amy, and your friend, has two questions. can you comment on fad diets like keto? And the other one, which isn't really related, she says, are you, I guess you're helping people in cardiac rehab, but are they wearing masks? And if so, how are they tolerating this?
Yeah, so I'll start with the mask question first. Yes, everyone is wearing a mask. Staff is wearing a mask and a face shield and gloves. Every single patient is wearing a mask. And if they don't have one, we give them one as well. So that was one of the biggest concerns when resuming cardiac rehab, because we knew that everyone would have to wear a mask. The only other solution was to create like plexiglass barriers completely surrounding every person. And that just was not feasible. It wasn't doable. So we titrated everyone's exercise levels down. We started with the patients who were active in our program back in March. We took their exercise prescription that we had calculated and adapted them to, and we decreased it by at least 30 to 40%. And every single person came in wearing a mask, and every single person has tolerated it really well. We have not had one person, yank it off and be like, I can't breathe. The only complaint is that it gets a little hot. It gets a little warm around the face. But I think they said they're naturally used to, with regular exercise, their body temperature increasing. So far, to our shock and surprise, everyone has tolerated it very well. Everyone has been extremely compliant. And that was one of our first questions that we asked to other programs that had opened up before us. We had called and been like, hey, how is this going for you? Any tips? And they basically just said, decrease the levels and take it one day at a time. That's exactly what we're doing. And we're asking our patients to be very honest with us as to how they feel, because they know for the foreseeable future, they're going to have to, honestly, probably until a vaccine comes out, everyone's probably going to be recommended to wear masks. So it's been surprisingly very positive, with very minimal negatives. It's just kind of annoying, honestly. It gets a little sweaty and stuff, but we've been more than happy to, really accommodate our patients and give them another one if their mask that they're using is not working. And so for the other question, fad diets. So there are a lot out there. We mentioned intermittent fasting with skipping a meal. There's keto. Oh my gosh, I could go on and on. So the first thing I want to say is that with all of these scientific recommendations that come out by the FDA, by the USDA, all of the recommendations given by like the Mayo Clinic and the American Heart Association, none of them ever recommend cutting out a food group as a nutritional benefit. So drastically cutting your carbs has never been just a regular okay recommendation, unless you were told by your cardiologist or a dietitian that you really need to reduce your carb and sugar intake to manage your diabetes or something like that. That's one recommendation. But these other eating plans, they were not designed for or with people in mind that have heart disease, that have other considerations, that are on all sorts of medications that may not tolerate us doing a very drastic eating plan. They're designed for just normal, healthy, average individuals that are on the younger side, that can tolerate kind of flip-flopping their eating pattern and seeing what's good for them, that probably still have really fast metabolisms. But for the most part, all of these fad diets are exactly what they are. They're diets. They are not lifestyle habits. So we can try doing the keto diet. We can try eating a paleo pattern diet, but 9 times out of 10, it's not something that we can stick with for the long term. So if we're not going to be able to stick with it, it kind of makes it very invaluable to us. We want to be able to change our eating patterns to stuff that we can, figure out what works for us and then just stick with it for the long term. We don't want to have to worry about, cutting things out for only 3 months and then bouncing right back to the old eating patterns that we have. And yeah, some of these eating patterns may help us lose weight because we drastically cut back on something or because we drastically change. But if we change things a little bit at a time, we'll be able to make these healthier decisions and stick to them for the the long term, not just for like 3 to 4 months. So really across healthcare professionals, these fad diets are not highly recommended unless you've had consultations with a dietitian and they can put together an eating plan, almost like an eating nutritional meal plan for you that may very much fit with an eating pattern, but it's prescribed to you for specific reasons. That's very appropriate. But if it's something you're just trying to do on your own, I don't recommend doing it without some sort of like professional guidance or counseling with someone who knows your condition or just your overall health status and your goals well.
Craig Hardison has a question. He wants to know if you recommend buying any blood pressure machines or drugstore health monitors.
Absolutely.
To monitor things at home.
Absolutely. So that's something we tell all of our cardiac rehab patients. Monitoring what you can at home every day is very important, especially nowadays, to where we might have had some lapse in follow-up with our physicians, with our rehab clinics and things like that. So things like your blood pressure, they are very easy to get. Just standard upper arm blood pressure cuffs is the ideal recommendation. The ones that go around your wrist sometimes have been shown to be a little spotty with their accuracy. So if you're first off going to go out and buy a blood pressure cuff, you can get them at, I've even seen them in drug stores, grocery stores. Just a basic upper arm blood pressure cuff is all you need. The most popular brand is Omron, Omron, and they have been very valid and very accurate from what I've seen. We do a lot of validations of individuals' blood pressure cuff in cardiac rehab, so I can tell you that that brand has been pretty accurate. Monitoring your blood pressure every day is a very, very useful tool for monitoring your health. If a lot of you remember probably from lectures and talks with your doctors or rehab professionals, you can't feel your blood pressure. You have no symptoms. If you do, it's not going to be until it is astronomically high. I could be walking around with a blood pressure of 190 over 110 right now, and I would not have any idea. Monitoring our blood pressure at home is the only way to know if our medications working. Are they doing what they're supposed to? I'm doing all this exercise. I'm doing all this sodium restriction for my blood pressure. Is it doing what it's supposed to? Or am I getting the benefit from all of these things I'm actively trying to pursue? Monitoring your blood pressure every day will tell you that. So that's a standard recommendation that I would give even just healthy individuals, because it's something that you can catch proactively. There's something called essential hypertension, which a lot of people have, and it's kind of individuals who develop high blood pressure with no specific root cause, and a lot of times it can just be due to heredity. So monitoring your blood pressure regularly, even outside of individuals that have heart disease, is a very vital tool, something you can do at a very inexpensive level, and you can just do it first thing in the morning. It's extremely beneficial and gives you a lot of knowledge in your health. Monitoring your blood pressure only when you go to the doctor's office oftentimes can be deceiving, because sometimes we can have that white coat hypertension response to where we get a little nervous, we get a little anxious being there in the office. So what we get in the office or at the clinic or wherever we go may not be representative of what our true numbers are at home when we are relaxed in our day-to-day lives. So that too can give your doctors and your clinicians a good picture of what your blood pressure actually is, and looking at the trends. They never just look at one number and decide a whole treatment plan on blood pressure. So monitoring your blood pressure at home, and it'll also tell you your heart rate as well. It's a very, very important tool that we recommend everyone attempt to do.
Is there a difference with sea salt versus regular salt?
Salt is salt. It's just flavoring and texturing, sodium content. Unfortunately, there are sodiums that are like less sodium, like salt shakers as like 33% less salt. But unfortunately, no, salt is salt. Some have better texture, better colors. Maybe the flavor is a little bit different, but there's still going to be, sodium is going to be sodium, and that's going to be the core component of it. Yeah.
We have a question about what the role of a caregiver can be in providing help providing exercise in certain situations?
So in a time like this, I think the best role a caregiver can provide is just motivation. So the caregiver, most likely, if they're asking these questions, they know that their spouse or significant other, whoever they live with, needs to exercise regularly. They need to eat right. So just being that constant support of motivation and accountability can go a long way. Being like, hey, I'm going to go out for my walk now. You want to join me? Or, hey, do you want to help me make this for dinner tonight? Or trying to proactively maybe buy healthier ingredients if you're the one that cooks. So really just using this opportunity while a lot of us are still kind of stuck inside together to be a good motivating tool and really serve as a good factor of accountability, and try and be a team member and not someone who's kind of nagging and say, you didn't do this today, get out there and walk. Try and be supportive and like an active partnership.
Mark G wants to know if you have any opinion on the daily use of a pulse oximeter reading. And if so, is it better in the morning or the evening to take that measurement?
So I guess it would be, are we talking about oxygen saturation or heart rate? Because normally pulse oximeters will give you both readings. So looking at your heart rate first thing in the morning on a pulse oximeter is great because it gives you a very good true reading of what your more true resting heart rate will be. So everything in terms of our oxygen saturation, our heart rate, and our blood pressure is going to fluctuate every hour of every day. Right now, my heart rate is probably nice and low. My blood pressure hopefully is nice and low, but the second I get up and walk into my kitchen to make dinner, it's going to go up a little bit because I'm standing and I'm being active. So the best time to take all of those clinical measurements has been shown to be in the morning. So whether you're monitoring your blood pressure, your heart rate, your pulse oximetry, all of the above, doing that in the morning is a really good picture. Now, if you're someone who's worried about your oxygen saturation, if you have a little pulse oximeter, keeping it with you while you exercise is actually a really good tool. Just kind of like you would track with a device, it can give you what your oxygen saturation is kind of during exercise. If you just throw it on your finger while you're walking, and if it's in the 90s, that's a really good thing. And it can give you an idea if you're someone who does have respiratory problems, if it's dropping too low, and give you a good inclination of if you should kind of pull back a little bit on your exercise and stop and take a break. So that's a really good tool to use all throughout the day. But if you're looking to get a good resting kind of standard measurement on a daily basis, doing it in the morning is what's ideal.
Linda Douglas wants to know about salt substitutes.
Salt substitutes. Okay, so this really is something you want to try and incorporate a little bit at a time. So we've had a lot of feedback from patients and members of Cardiac Rehab because we talk about this in education. Like I mentioned, education is a huge part of Cardiac Rehab, and we do at least 1 or 2 days where we just talk about sodium. One of the most popular ones is Mrs. Dash. From what I've seen, you either hate it or you love it. The best way for a salt substitute is to use herbs and spices. I'll be completely honest. And again, doing it a little bit at a time. If you are someone who cooks from home all the time, but you throw more and more salt in there to taste, try and incorporate and replace a little bit at a time with herbs and spices. Rather than just salt. So there are, like I said, if you're someone who's like, ooh, I don't know if I can do that, you can get granulated salt that's actually lower sodium. So you can try that at first as a stepping stone, and then you can try these other salt substitutes like Mrs. Dash that have all different types of flavors and seasonings incorporated in there, and see what works best for you and what tastes best. But giving those types of salt substitutes out there a try is just kind of try storming almost. Just buy one, see if you like it. If not, it's a miss. Try another one. Because oftentimes eventually you'll find something that works best for you. But like I said, trying to just go for maybe the lower sodium version first and then taper that down, or just taper the amount of salt that you actually use down a little bit at a time. And I know all different grocery stores have at least 1 or 2 options of lower sodium salt or salt substitutes. So just giving them a try and seeing what works best for you is what's good. Because what I might like and enjoy, someone else might be like, oh gosh, no, thank you.
Okay, as we're coming to the end of our time slot here, I'll ask you one last question and we'll return back for closing comments. Sam has done a good job asking questions. He wants to know, should there be differences in blood pressure readings depending on sitting up versus laying down?
So you most likely will have a little bit of a difference, definitely, because there's going to be a difference in our circulation, but it should not be very significant at all, because sitting here, I'm still at rest. Even talking and things like that will increase your blood pressure slightly. So if I were to sit here and be at rest for 5 minutes or so and take a resting reading, it should fall within normal limits for myself. And then if I were to lay down, it should still very much be within normal limits, but not that drastically different for laying down to sitting up. Optimally, if you're going to monitor your blood pressure at home, you want to be kind of sitting up in a chair. You want your feet flat on the floor, and you want your back not kind of rested all the way back, but you want to be sitting upright, and you want your arm relaxed on a surface right at heart level, kind of like how you can see I am right now. A lot of times at the doctor's offices, we're kind of slumped over in a chair and our arm is kind of dangling. If we're going to measure resting blood pressure, that's the optimal way to do it. Not lying down, but sitting up in a chair relaxed with your arm on the table, like so. So that's the best way to measure blood pressure. And in terms of differences between laying down and seated, you will sometimes see a little bit of a difference, but it should not be extremely drastic. If you do have some sort of clinical, consideration or high risk condition, that there could be some exceptions to that rule, but for the average individual, most likely not.
Let me just ask you one more question here.
Sure.
From Janice Gregory. First, she points out that Samsung's have an app. Phones have apps.
Great.
There's a lot. Listen, as an Apple aficionado,
oh yeah,
plenty of apps. The health app itself connects to medical records systems, and I can see things. In my case, at Johns Hopkins Medicine, and it does count steps. And a lot of the apps you get can connect to the health app. It's absolutely very interesting. She says that she wants to know, can you take cardiac rehab more than once? She had it 20 years ago after, I don't know, CAB, I don't know.
Coronary artery disease. Probably.
Bypass, yeah, coronary artery bypass. And then recently she got a pacemaker, she's saying. But I guess that's her question is, can you take it more than once?
Yeah, so it really depends on your condition and your diagnosis. If you had a device implanted, that alone will not qualify you to have cardiac rehab. Oftentimes it needs to be a new diagnosis. So if you had an arrhythmia that resulted in you having the need for a device, that would fall in line. If you have a new diagnosis of something along the lines of heart failure or a cardiomyopathy, which may be another reason why you have a device, that could potentially be another diagnosis for you to come to cardiac rehab as well. And conditions like heart failure or cardiomyopathy, they're progressive conditions. So oftentimes a doctor will wait to refer an individual if they've recently been in the hospital because they had heart failure symptoms or cardiomyopathy symptoms or complications. So if you do have one of those types of risk factors or conditions, it's always a good thing to talk to your doctor about. Now, I will say there will be some insurances that may cover cardiac rehab for things like heart failure, and some that require a little bit more specific ejection fraction numbers and things like that. But talking to your doctor and looking at what sort of conditions may apply to you or diagnosis may apply to you, you may be very much eligible for cardiac rehab, but it would not be able to be for the same diagnosis. So if you had a bypass procedure about 20 years ago, you would not be able to do cardiac rehab again under the diagnosis of coronary artery bypass. So the referral would have to say, if we're getting into the specifics, the referral itself that your doctor fills out would have to have a different diagnosis. And then what we would do in cardiac rehab is we would just make sure we have the appropriate medical records to back that diagnosis, and you should be good to go. So first of all, you'd want to just talk to your doctor about what might be applicable to you, or just call a local cardiac rehab. And they should always be more than happy to discuss whether or not you would fit into the parameters based on your condition, your diagnosis, and your insurance as well.
Hello, my name is Ash Ramamurthy, President of Mended Hearts, Chapter 94, the National Capital Chapter serving Maryland and DC. Welcome to our support group for those dealing with heart diseases as well as their families and caregivers. Each year, our chapter's accredited visitors provide support and shoulder to lean on for heart patients and caregivers at 6 area hospitals: MedStar Washington Hospital Center, George Washington University Hospital, Adventist Healthcare, White Oak and Shady Grove Medical Centers, Suburban Hospital, and St. Agnes Hospital in Baltimore. Our mission is as important as ever and will remain strong thanks to online technologies such as Zoom. I would like to personally thank all of you who are watching this video today and encourage you to join Mended Hearts. If you are not already a member, go to website mendedhearts.org, click join in the upper right hand corner. Our chapter's Vice President Amy Dukovic will now say a few words. Thank you very much.
Hello, I am Amy Dukovic, Vice President of Mended Hearts Chapter 94. Our chapter has held support groups monthly for nearly 45 years. But with the onset of COVID-19, we are now holding these meetings using Zoom online technology. We hope you find this format helpful in keeping connected. We are recording and archiving clinical presentations in case you are unable to participate in our monthly meetings. We are placing links to these presentations on our chapter website, and that is www.mendedhearts-metrodc.org, so that you can access them at your convenience. To echo my colleague Ash, on behalf of all of the officers and members of Mended Hearts Chapter 94, we thank you for your interest in our organization and wish you all good health.